Tonight, a major new poll for Sky News predicts that Labour is on course for a historic landslide win. We partnered with YouGov for a polling projection which shows Keir Starmer could be heading into Downing Street with a majority of 194 seats, bigger than Tony Blair achieved in 1997. We've got lots of interesting data, and our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is going to take you through it all. Also tonight, Nigel Farage takes over as leader of Reform UK and announces that he will be standing to become an MP at the election. As Keir Starmer says that he would be willing to deploy nuclear weapons to defend the United Kingdom. I'll be joined live by the Conservatives Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps. And ahead of the first TV leaders debate tomorrow, could they provide a turning point in the campaign and change the direction of the polls? All that and more with Chris Wilkins and Theo Bertram, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophie Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Will you join us on a day when the first YouGov MRP poll of the campaign has projected the results of the general election? And it doesn't just predict a Labour win. It doesn't just predict a Labour majority. It projects Keir Starmer winning the biggest Labour majority for 100 years. Now, politicians are right when they say the only poll that matters is the general election. This is just a polling snapshot of a moment in time. It doesn't take into account which candidate's running for an area, so it misses the incumbency factor. And of course, typically polls narrow as the election approaches. But still, it would be a huge, historic majority. And Conservatives will be asking themselves tonight, this projection could be wrong, but could it be that wrong? Well, let's bring in Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor, to run through the numbers for us. Sam.
Thank you, Sophie. This is the first of 3 YouGov projections during the general election campaign, arguably the first one, the most important. Let's have a look at the headline result. And here we go. It will show that Labour is on course for a historic majority. And you can see the number of seats here, 422. This is the number of seats which YouGov are projecting the Labour Party will win. This, Sophie, is the highest number in history. You look at the Conservatives. This comes at the expense of Rishi Sunak's party. Now, when I talk to Tory MPs, they typically say we think the low point of this, the lower band of what they could get is somewhere around the 160, 170 mark. This is even lower. So this is worse than the worst expectations of most Tory MPs. And I am told tonight in the last hour, some Tory MPs are panicking about this projection. Over here, Reform, you've got the leader, Nigel Farage, who's been leader for about 3 hours. They're not projected to get anything. It's hard for small parties to win, but we'll see whether Nigel Farage's candidacy changes that. John Swinney of the SNP, this is another big result, big drop. There are 57 seats in Scotland. SNP on course only to win 17. One of the big winners from the projection tonight is the Liberal Democrats. Sir Ed Davey's party on 48, that's quadrupling the number of seats that they have, and 2 for the Greens, that's up 1. Let's look at the change. And you can see here the enormous gain in the number of Keir Starmer's putative MPs. We always said he had a mountain to climb. This is him climbing it, getting to the top and doing a victory lap, all at the expense of Rishi Sunak. You can see that plunging there. Now let's look at who are potentially the big winners, and let's have a little look at the faces. Now take a long, hard look at some of the most famous faces over there as well in British politics, because you might not see them for much longer. These are the people who are the big beasts who could lose. Jeremy Hunt could lose to the Lib Dems. Grant Shapps could lose to Labour. Penny Mordaunt to Labour. Mel Stride, Work and Pensions, to Labour. Alex Chalk by an extraordinary 31 points down to the Liberal Democrats. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary. Johnny Mercer, Esther McVeigh, Gillian Keegan, Simon Hart, David T.C. Davis, Victoria Prentice, all potentially gone on July the 4th. That is 12 out of Rishi Sunak's 26-strong cabinet. But they're not the only ones in the Tories. Let's look at the next slide, because you've got some famous faces on this as well. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, a former leader of the Tory party, down below Labour by 25 points. That really isn't looking good. Steve Baker, the high priest of Brexit, now a government minister, down by 26 points. Not sure the Greek holiday is going to make much difference with him. Greg Hands, one-time Tory chairman, on the cusp, down by 1 point. Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the most famous faces in the Conservative Party, He is down by 6 points. Will that be reality TV's gain? Jake Berry, Blackburn MP, Rossendale and Darwell, 14 points down. Tobias Elwood, familiar on our breakfast show quite a lot, down by 16 points. Liam Fox, leadership contender, down by 5 points. And a lot of people think that this woman, Miriam Cates, could be a future leader, but she's down by 20 points. So it's really hard for her to see her surviving. All of this suggests that we're on the cusp of dramatic change. Let's just have a look at just how dramatic that change could be. This is Boris Johnson's Britain. This is the electoral map from 2019. Look at all this blue all over the country, 80 strong majority, and SNP yellow all over Scotland. Now, let's look at what this projection does to this map. There it is. Gosh, you can see. Now, the darker the blue and the red, the more confident YouGov are about the projection. But you have to say, Sophie, this electoral map looks nothing like what we had in 2019.
I mean, it's extraordinary, to be honest. It is worth taking a step back and thinking just how extraordinary this is. It's a patchwork, isn't it, of colours now on this map. And you can really see this almost was the story of 2019, the red wall. I mean, that is right back at where it was before. But it's the blue wall that the Conservatives are going to be really concerned about, isn't it? The safe seats that they once thought were the Tory shires, their true blue heartlands, and they're going to some to Labour, but also to the Lib Dems there as well. That's
right. You can see the Tory party being kind of pushed, like the South West, which was David Cameron's crowning electoral achievement. Well, that's a patchwork of red and yellow as well as blue. The red walls turned red again here, and the SNP, well, they're still clearly viable in parts of Scotland, but you have in this area, south of Glasgow and Edinburgh, clearly they are taking back some of the seats that they had before. So that's an enormous change, I think, in our politics.
And look, the Conservatives will say, as I'm sure they will later on as well, it's just one poll. The only poll that matters, of course, is the one that happens on the day of the election. But it would have to be seriously wrong, wouldn't it, to give Rishi Sunak's party any hope of victory. Let's have a look and step back for a minute and look at some of the headlines that have been revealed by this projection, shall we, Sam? Because again, it's worth just taking a step back. They're talking about the biggest Labour majority in 100 years, aren't they?
That's right. Biggest majority in 100 years. Stanley Baldwin was the last Prime Minister to get a majority bigger than that. Labour on 422 seats, the Conservatives 140. The Conservatives facing their biggest losses since 1906, and those high-profile defeats. Jeremy Hunt, Grant Shapps, who tried to contact us earlier, you'll be speaking to in a moment, Penny Mordaunt and Jacob Rees-Mogg. This is the electoral map being not just redrawn, completely reshaped if the result is anything like this on July the 4th.
Now, if you're a politics geek like me and Sam, there's always a few seats that you kind of listen out for, because you know that those are the ones that are the bellwethers, the swing seats, the stories that tell the overall picture of the election. And you've got a few, haven't you, Sam, that you want to bring to us?
That's right. Let's look at the big map here. And what we can do is drill down in lots of different areas. So this is the overall map from 2019. Now let's switch to the map from this projection and have a look at that. There it is, and you can see all the red of the red wall back again and the patchwork elsewhere. Right, let's home in on a few areas. I think we go to the north first of all. Let's have a look. And there you can see, what are the remarkable things? Areas like the northeast, which just 3 or 4 years ago, the Tories were doing incredibly well in. Now, look at all that red. And you can see, while there are some rural constituencies in the north that remain blue, really a really strong showing for the Labour Party across Midlands and the north. Let's focus in on one town where Sky News viewers are particularly familiar, and that, of course, is Grimsby and Cleethorpes, the constituency that's our target town. And this looks like it's going to be an absolute stonking victory for the Labour Party. They go up 12 points to 44, beating the Tories on 27, Reform doing pretty well there on 16. We'll be following whether or not that turns out to be right, in particular on election day. But I have to say, that's the kind of seismic test. If you get Grimsby and Cleethorpes, then you really do, I think, have one foot in the door of Downing Street. Let's look at the next place. We're going to fly around the country. We're going to move all the way down, I think, now to the south. And this is a fascinating seat here. This is in Bristol. And what you can see there is Bristol Central seat going green. Why does that matter? Because it's held at the moment, or has been, while Parliament's been sitting, by Thangham Debonair. She's a member of the Shadow Cabinet. Maybe not for much longer if the polls go that way. Let's go to the next place as we fly around. I think we're going to go next, hopefully,
to
Godalming, Jeremy Hunt's seat. There, Jeremy Hunt under threat from the Liberal Democrats. Look, 46 to 31 for the Tories. That's a very big difference. It's going to be hard for Jeremy Hunt. He knows it. He was telling newspapers at the weekend. Let's go flying again to Wales. This time we're going to look at the... there's Bristol Central. We were talking about that. Thangham Debonair there on course, according to this projection, to lose. Now let's go to Wales, where they've got the seat of the Welsh Secretary, David T.C. Davis, and he's behind by quite a substantial 11 points behind Labour, and all the way up to Scotland, where there's a seat, Falkirk, which so often has been important in our politics. In many ways, what happened to the MP there ended up changing our politics and resulting in Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader. If we could fly all the way up to Scotland, that's an SNP-held seat at the moment. Here it comes, and that goes to Labour by 5 percentage points. Again, flipping, showing the other big story of this poll and projection being the rout of the SNP up in Scotland in all of these key areas, or in the Glasgow belt. All of this suggests that we are on the cusp of a giant tidal wave if this projection turns out to be right, Sophie. The collapse of the Tories, the march of Labour, the problems of the SNP all around the country. Few people thought Keir Starmer could do this in 2020 when he was elected, but now we seem to be very close to a big rewriting of our politics. July the 4th could be a massive day that Britain takes turns a corner.
Absolutely extraordinary stuff, isn't it? I think what many people will be thinking as they listen to us today is, how can we trust this? How reliable are MRPs? What is an MRP? And, should we believe what it says?
So, YouGov, the company that we've partnered up with, putting its entire reputation on the line with this and the next two MRPs. So as far as they're concerned, it's pretty existential. What they do, Sophie, is they survey about 55,000 people over days and days, over a week, and they work out the types of people and how they're going to vote and how many people there are from each category in each constituency. It was remarkably successful in 2017 when it projected that Theresa May was getting a hung parliament, when other pollsters were saying it was going to be a landslide for Theresa May. It was successful in 2019, calling roughly the scale of Boris Johnson's 80-strong majority. So it's got a good track record. It's an MRP. Those three letters don't mean you're always right. Other pollsters use it. The numbers that are coming out of other pollsters vary wildly, but we've partnered up with this particular company because we think they're the gold standard, and they are putting their reputation on the line by doing this now. Yeah,
and not long left to find out if they're right as well. Thank you very much indeed, Sam Coates. Well, there we have it, the first YouGov MRP of this election campaign. And what an astonishing result it shows. In many ways, it shouldn't be a surprise, because this is effectively what the polling has been telling us for some time now. But at the same time, to see it laid out in an MRP projection like this, a historic majority for the Labour Party, an absolutely devastating result predicted for the Conservative Party, and also really, I guess, for the SNP as well. Is that going to be the story of the night? Of course, there is still an awful lot to play for. Campaigns can change a lot as well. Incumbency can have a factor too. But I have to say, I would imagine that there'll be a few Conservative MPs who'll be feeling pretty gloomy, pretty worried about their futures after today's YouGov MRP. Now, the other big story of tonight, which is that days after ruling himself out, Nigel Farage has U-turned, announcing that he will stand for Reform UK in the general election, and he'll also take over as party leader. He's going to be contesting the Essex constituency of Clacton, his 8th attempt to enter Parliament. Now, a warning that this video from his announcement does include some flash photography.
So I'm coming back as leader of Reform UK, but not just for this election campaign. I'm coming back for the next 5 years. And there is one very simple reason for that. We all know already that the Conservative Party will be in opposition. But it won't be the opposition. They are incapable of it. They've spent most of the last 5 years fighting each other rather than standing up and fighting for the interests of this country. They are split down the middle on policy, and frankly right now they don't stand for a damn thing. So our aim in this election is to get many, many millions of votes.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here with us now. So, Nigel Farage hoping it'll be 8th time lucky.
Yes, he stood 7 times before. He first stood for Parliament in 1994. That was a by-election in Eastleigh. He actually stood for the European Parliament that year as well. But of course, he got, as you know, he was an MEP for quite a long time, 99 to Brexit in 2016. He has fought since that first election. Salisbury 97, Bexhill and Battle 2001, South Thanet 2005, the Bromley and Chislehurst by-election 2006, Buckingham against John Bercow 2010, and South Thanet 2015. He polled 16,000 votes then, and he was only 2,000 or 3,000 off Craig McKinley, who was going to defend a similar seat. And of course, today he was going on about how he's cheated in that election. So yes, Clacton. The significance of Clacton is that it was won in a by-election by UKIP. Now, there was an MP called Douglas Carswell who defected from the Conservatives to UKIP. He won a by-election in 2014 in Clacton, and he held the seat in 2015, didn't contest it the next time. But I have to say now, big majority for the Tories, 24,702. It's held by Giles Watling. He is the former actor, and he's got a very, you might say, plummy actor's voice when he gets up, and he wears a Garrick Club tie in the House of Commons as well. So he'll be sweating tonight. Well, if anyone can pull it off, I suppose Nigel Farage can. I mean, he is the great master magician of British politics. He held back that announcement about being a candidate right to the end of his speech. And great theatrics, of course.
Loves to keep us waiting.
He's box office. Love him or loathe him, he's box office.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it, for the Conservative Party? You say that Nigel Farage is box office, and we saw, of course, the YouGov MRP projection, which showed Reform not winning any seats, but eating into the Conservative vote in lots of areas. And that was before the Nigel Farage announcement.
That poll tips Hartlepool as Reform UK's best hope. Now, that might change, of course, with Mr Farage standing in Clacton. Hartlepool, of course, was the scene of another by-election, which the Tories won from Labour in 2021. But Clacton, well, it's up right in the north of Essex, seaside town. Demographically, well, apparently a third of the population there are over 65 or older, and it's got one of the fewest proportion of graduates living in the constituency. So it's the sort of fertile place where Reform UK would hope to do well. Yeah. So he's probably made quite a canny choice. I
remember visiting it during the Douglas Carswell years. I imagine there'll be a lot of political correspondents getting the train down there soon. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. And here is a list of the candidates declared so far in the constituency of Clacton. So you're having a look at the candidates now who are standing in the Clacton constituency at the general election. Right, let's have a little bit more analysis, shall we, about that MRP poll from YouGov. Michael Thrasher is Sky's election analyst, the master of crunching through the data and the numbers. What do you make of the projection that YouGov have made?
I really wouldn't have watched that if I was a Conservative supporter. It's pretty grim reading, isn't it? If you just look at the voting figures that YouGov published, a straight swing gives Labour a majority of around 50. But when you employ the MRP method, you drill down into at the constituency level, and hence those vote shares translate into a huge majority, bigger than, as you rightly pointed out, bigger than Tony Blair achieved in 1997. And the Conservatives, even on the vote share figures, it would be the worst Conservative performance ever. And below 30% is dreadful for them. So they not only lose well over 200 seats, they would be around about a quarter of the vote if this poll is correct. Now, 31 days to save the Conservative Party becomes the, if you like, the note that Sunak needs to sort of reach out. Not only reach out to the electorate, but also members of his own party, not just the MPs, but also activists, because they're facing annihilation if the YouGov poll is proved correct. Now, polls can change. This is just a projection based on the voting intention questions being asked now. There is still some major part of the campaign to go. There are debates, there are discussions, there's coverage, and all the rest of it. But to me, Sunak's message just isn't cutting through to the electorate. I don't think the electorate is necessarily engaged with the general election, and those that are engaged don't appear particularly impressed by Sunak's performance. Neither are they particularly impressed by Starmer, but Labour don't have to do anything, really. They just have to, as Rachel Reeves is doing in terms of economic policy, she's just saying we'll be a safe pair of hands. They don't need to go into any great detail with these kinds of polling figures.
It's so interesting, isn't it? As you say, the kind of Ming Bars strategy, just making sure it just doesn't smash over the floor as you kind of carry it over by doing anything surprising. Does the YouGov projection pass the smell test? You know, you say that you're not picking up a great enthusiasm for the Labour Party. Is it possible, do you think, or even likely, that Keir Starmer could get the biggest majority for 100 years?
Well, we have to look in detail at the MRP polling, and as Sam rightly pointed out, it did well in 2017. In 2019, they underestimated the polling, MRP polling, underestimated the performance of the Conservatives and overestimated the performance of Labour. That said, if you like, the error, or the undershoot, whatever you want to call it, was around about 20 to 30 seats, respectively, and that's not going to change the essential narrative. It might change the size of the majority, of course, and it might change the number of cabinet ministers that fall on the basis of this particular projection. And it is only a projection, of course, but it's not fundamentally a problem in terms of the polling method. MRP polling is here to stay. They will have looked at what happened in 2019 in detail and revised perhaps some of the way in which they model these data. And we simply don't know at this point how the general election is going to go, except to say it's going to go particularly badly for the Conservatives if things stand as they currently are. And Nigel Farage standing now in Clacton will really, in some ways, it will concentrate the minds of Conservatives. They have to somehow or another erode the base of the Reform Party. And they did that at the beginning of the campaign, where they introduced some measures which were likely to appeal to social conservatives, for example, national service and those kinds of issues. But they now have to tread a line which says, look, if you vote for reform in the general election, this is likely to happen. Or if you give a protest vote, say, to the Greens, this too is likely to happen. So they have to tread a fine line without overstepping the mark here. They have to somehow or another have a message which has a positive appeal to Conservatives that are thinking of switching to these parties. They're not going to, these voters are not going to be intimidated into voting the Conservatives. They have to be persuaded that that is the proper thing to do. And simply pointing out to the fear of a large Labour majority isn't going to work. They have to come out with a positive message, and they have to work on in terms of converting people who are thinking of voting for these small parties into reverting back to the Conservatives.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Professor Michael Thrasher there, our election analyst. Right, busy evening. Let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Director of Strategy for Theresa May, that is Chris Wilkins, and Theo Bertram, who is an advisor to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, now Director at the cross-party think tank, the Social Market Foundation. Great to have you on the programme. Blimey. Chris, what, I mean, you will have seen all of these kind of projections, MRP polls, analysis about when elections should be called, campaigning when you were working with Theresa May, of course. What's your sense of where the Conservative Party is right now as the campaign starts?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm absolutely right. I remember I was in the bunker in 2017 during that election campaign, and YouGov published an MRP poll, and everyone looked at it and everyone laughed and said, what's that about? That's not going to happen. And of course, a few weeks later, they were pretty much bang on. So the first thing I'd say is I've learned never to underestimate a YouGov MRP. And it feels truthy, doesn't it? It feels like what the country is saying, and part of the problem is that the country aren't listening. They don't want to listen to the Conservative Party. They've pretty much made up their mind, so it's difficult to know. I think the difficulty the Conservative Party has now is that they've clearly set out on a political strategy for this campaign to try and squeeze the reform vote, try and win back some of those maybe older voters and sort of scare them effectively into voting for the Conservative Party. It hasn't worked so far, and today Nigel Farage makes his announcement and you think, surely that strategy's run its road. So very, very difficult for them, but a lot of concern faces in the Conservative camp tonight.
Yeah, I can imagine. How do you think Labour's going to be reacting to it, Theo?
Well, I don't think they'll be popping the champagne corks in Labour HQ just quite yet tonight.
Maybe put them on ice, say.
But I think they can definitely feel that the Ming vase hasn't wobbled on the way so far. I think they will be looking. There was another rival MRP poll today as well that showed Labour with a smaller majority, but still more than an 80-seat majority. And that MRP actually had a much smaller sample group than the YouGov one. And YouGov is the gold standard, as you say. So I think there'll be a lot of confidence in Labour HQ tonight, but there's still a long way to go and no one's cast a vote yet.
Chris, you mentioned there the memory of the MRP poll that came out when you were in number 10. And sorry to bring back any kind of, PTSD or anything. But how do you think they'll be feeling inside number 10 now?
I think they are feeling very concerned. People know. If I were Conservative Cabinet Minister now, I'd say to you, look, the only poll that matters is the one on polling day. I would point out that actually a lot of these seats are pretty thinly balanced. This poll has a high number of Liberal Democrat seats. The one, as Theo mentioned earlier today, was slightly different, etc. So there are variations. It can make the difference between 194 and, say, 80 or etc. But it doesn't make the difference between winning or losing. And the other thing to remember about this election campaign is that Rishi Sunak has to win this election. No party is going to prop up a Conservative minority government. Keir Starmer doesn't even actually really need to win it because he could form a coalition with anyone else. So they know where this is going. What do you do in those circumstances? What they really need to do is, as Michael Thrasher just sort of indicated, is say, look, don't give them this huge majority, that's dangerous, and if you vote for reform, you're going to do that, etc. It's a strategy that actually Ruth Davidson ran a few years ago in a Scottish election campaign where it was about actually return a strong opposition. But of course, as a Prime Minister, you can't do that because you're fighting to win every vote, aren't you? So they're really in a bind, and I think the strategy so far hasn't worked in this campaign, and tonight they need to look at that and think, OK, we've got still a month to go, how do we change the strategy?
And the other big news today, of course, was Nigel Farage saying that not only is he going to become the leader of Reform UK, but he's going to stand as well as a candidate. Theo, do you think it could impact the election race?
I think it will have an impact on the Tory party, and really that's Nigel Farage's superpower. It's not winning vote at elections. As John was pointing out, we've seen a lot of elections and we've seen Nigel Farage lose a lot of times. But his superpower is his ability to influence the Tory party, particularly while they're in government. And it was interesting today that while he was talking about standing for this election, he was also talking about the next 5 years of opposition. And that's clearly where he sees the opportunity for reform. I think that would be the big concern for the Conservative Party, and I think also a big mistake for the Conservative Party to try and chase the votes on the right, because there's just not enough votes there to build back that coalition that they had before in the centre ground.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. A really interesting debate. We'll have more, of course, from Chris and Theo shortly. But in the meantime, could it be eighth time lucky for Nigel Farage? We're going to be having a look at what could make the difference. The case for the nuclear deterrent. We're going to look at Keir Starmer's effort to shift perceptions of Labour on defence.
We'd all fled to London because of the widespread homophobia that there was in our communities, and we didn't expect a Welsh mining community to be any different. All I wanted was to be accepted. So that's all we ever wanted. In those few seconds in the miners' hall in Wales, I was just given that absolute acceptance.
Are you ready? Don't worry, you better get ready. Don't worry, you better get ready about the caravan.
It's an amazing story. So 40 years ago, during the miners' strike, one of the biggest industrial disputes this country ever saw, a group of gay people in London decided that they were going to support the miners. They went out and fundraised, raised money, and decided to twin with a Welsh mining community in South Wales, sent them the money at a time when the country was incredibly homophobic. But despite that, this community accepted them with open arms, and it was the beginning of an amazing friendship and bond that lasts to this day. And this film tells the story of that year and also shows the impact of that story and how it's changed the course of queer rights in this country and had a big impact on LGBT people today.
It's probably true, your observation, that it seemed there were two very different communities. But in fact, through the process of getting to know each other, we found we had an awful lot in common.
Like what?
Well, we were both struggling against a society that was, for our case, it was homophobic. For the miners' community, they were struggling to you know, in an industrial dispute, they were had a lot of opposition to what they were trying to do, which was to save their jobs. So we were both communities of struggle, communities that were up against it. And coming together, we were able to support one another. Something about solidarity, old-fashioned word, but there was solidarity there.
Hello, welcome back. Well, on the Politics Hub during the election campaign, we're having a look at where the parties have been campaigning every day because we get a bit of a real sense about how they're fighting the election. So let's have a look at that today. Right, here we go. This is the first one. That is Rishi Sunak. He was in Oxfordshire for the Conservative Party campaign where he met with a rowing group, very on trend there, of course, in Oxford. Labour were in Greater Manchester to launch their pitch to voters on defence and security. We'll have more on that in a moment as well. The Lib Dems' Daisy Cooper was in Henley-on-Thames, so very close there to Rishi Sunak, one of the areas she says has been affected by the dumping of raw sewage. Meanwhile, in Scotland, John Swinney was out in Stirling for the SNP, and Richard Tice and Nigel Farage were in London, where the latter made that announcement that he would be taking over as leader of the party and also standing in the general election. Now, though, we can hear from Sky's political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh on Labour's defence plans.
The Labour leader brought out 10 veterans, now parliamentary Labour Party candidates, on stage today to make the point that under his watch, the nuclear deterrent is safe.
It's fundamental. It's a vital part of our defence. And of course that means we have to be prepared to use it.
Labour's commitment to what they call a nuclear deterrent triple lock is seen as a deliberate attempt to wear the Conservatives' clothes on defence and security.
I mean, Labour will say anything in this election. I mean, anyone who has seen the progress of Labour in the last few years, you know, you've got a leader under Jeremy Corbyn who wanted to essentially turn the army into a peace corps, but Keir Starmer supported him not once but twice.
Labour's promise isn't new. Earlier this year in Barrow-in-Furness, they committed to build 4 new submarines, continue sea patrols and a commitment spending of 2.5% of GDP, but only when they can afford it.
The Conservatives want to make this a clear dividing line between them and Labour. They say, look, we've signed up to 2.5% spending on defence by 2030, where Labour's is only an ambition. And Rishi Sunak says he can do this all without borrowing, even though at the last budget, defence was actually cut. Labour says the economy comes first.
In Scotland, the SNP disagree on principle and now say they're the only party that objects to a nuclear deterrent.
The SNP's had an in-principle objection to nuclear weapons for all of my lifetime, and for the remainder of my lifetime, I expect that to be the case. The SNP does not believe in nuclear weapons, and we don't believe in their possession or their use.
Thank you.
Shadow cabinet ministers who had previously voted against renewing Trident now say they sign up to Labour's plan. But Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner adds her long-term aim of international disarmament remains. Serena Barker Singh, Sky News.
OK, there we go. That was Serena Barker Singh there. Well, we've been talking about Labour's defence announcement today. Here to respond to that, we can speak now to the Defence Secretary, that is Grant Shapps, who joins us now from Hertfordshire. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Now, Mr Shapps, you were here, of course, to talk to us about defence, one of the potentially the biggest things of the election campaign, which I'm obviously very keen to do. But first, just to address the YouGov MRP poll that we've been talking about today, projecting Keir Starmer winning the biggest Labour majority for 100 years, seats including your own in Welling and Hatfield. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I always accept that my seat is at risk. I've always thought of it as being marginal. I always fight for every single vote. The second thing I'd say is it's all really interesting seeing large polls. There was actually an actual vote in my constituency within the last month. And in that, had that been a general election, I most likely would have won that vote. So I think kind of probably put more stock in people going out to vote than an opinion poll taken across the country and then projected here. And when I talk to people on the doorstep, the reason is clear. People recognise that we've actually got a plan for the country, that we're actually executing that plan, that it's not always easy, that it's been a tough few years with the pandemic or in Europe, and that actually what Keir Starmer does is snipes from the sidelines. I can't think of a single thing he's actually said in this election campaign, possibly with the exception of today, when he's claiming again he can be trusted on defence, when his own deputy shadow prime minister tonight has come out, Angela Rayner, and said she hasn't changed her mind about this. His own shadow foreign secretary, David Lammy, has voted against Trident in the past. You cannot trust Labour on defence. We're coming up with the big, bold ideas, and I'm really happy to leave it to the electorate in still over 30 days' time to decide rather than relying on opinion polls.
I'm very keen to talk to you about defence, as I said, including on your opinion on the Labour Party's plans. But look, there is one other thing that we do have to address. And I have to say, fair play to you for coming on the programme this evening. I take your hat off because when we originally launched the YouGov MRP projection on Sky News, you called our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, when he was on air. I just want to play to you what happened so that you can respond to it.
Hello, Grant Shapps. You're live on Sky News. I'm in the studio with Sophie Ridge. Have you just seen that you're about to lose your seat according to the Sky News YouGov projection? He just put the phone down on me.
Right, so your chance to clear up what happened. Did you know that he was on air at the time?
Putting aside what Ofcom would say about doing that, I hadn't realised Sky had turned in some sort of Michael McIntyre big show and was putting people straight through on air. I was actually coming on this evening, and so I knew I was coming on this evening. I thought we'd have a chat about the programme, but there I was suddenly presented with the opportunity to go live on air. Wasn't not entirely the plan, but I was pleased to come on anyway. And as I say, when it comes to polls, I've been presented with these for years and years, and not to sound too much like a politician, the only poll that matters is the one on election day. And given that I've seen an election poll within the last 30 days in my own seat, I think that's probably worth considering a bit more than an opinion poll across the country.
Well, look, fair play. This is your chance to be live on Sky News at a time of your choosing. So there you go.
I think next time if I'm on a broadcast, perhaps with another broadcaster, and I see that it's Sam Coates calling, I might put him on live on the BBC.
I'll see what his reaction is to that later. He's probably kind of slightly concerned about that.
After I've consulted with Ofcom about whether that is appropriate.
Right, let's talk defence, shall we? This is why you're here today. Keir Starmer has promised a nuclear triple lock to protect Trident. What's your reaction to what he's had to say?
Well, I think this thing is extraordinary that Keir Starmer can claim that he is the party or the leader who would support Trident. He's got 12 members of his own front bench team who voted against Trident when they had the opportunity. He's got 4 members in his shadow cabinet, including his shadow foreign secretary, his shadow deputy prime minister, who voted against Trident. He won't commit the money to 2.5% of defence spending, of GDP on defence spending. So why should we believe him when he will not do those things, and when his team and even the shadow deputy prime minister tonight comes out and says she hasn't changed her mind about Trident? I simply don't think that's a basis for protecting this country. I think it would be dangerous for this country, frankly. And I don't believe that no matter how many times he says it, it makes it true when half the people behind him seemingly do not support his policy.
So just to come back to you on that, you mentioning Angela Rayner there in the interview that she gave. Just look at what she said in full, because she said, I haven't changed my mind, as you point out, but then she does say the vote that we had some years ago mentioned nothing about multilateral disarmament, and that's what I feel is very important for the long term. And she does say in the same interview that she believes in Trident. And I guess the other thing to say as well is, you know, you're talking about Labour MPs who voted against Trident 8 years ago. Is it not fair to say that the world has changed in those 8 years? You know, Russia's invaded Ukraine, there's been 119 extra nuclear missile tests in North Korea. Someone may, fair enough, have said, you know what, I thought we were okay back then, and now I've changed my mind. The world is a more dangerous place.
I just don't buy any of that. When it comes to something as serious as your nuclear deterrent, you can't have a situation where sometimes you're in favour when there's an election, but other times you're not in favour when you're actually asked to vote in the House of Commons. And the last time it was voted on, up to 50 Labour MPs at the time voted against. There are 4 very prominent members in the shadow cabinet and 12 in the shadow front bench. I don't buy this idea that the world is more dangerous now, so we needed nuclear deterrent now, but we somehow didn't need it before. Presumably, that means that it can be on or off on different days. The nuclear deterrent doesn't work like that. You have to be prepared to back it. This is something that takes decades to maintain. We have had nuclear subs at sea every single day for the last 54 years. That wouldn't be possible if you have parliamentarians and members of the cabinet into those kind of senior positions who vote against it and don't think it could be there. It damages the very credibility of your nuclear deterrent. So I think it's incredible in the true sense of the word, not just because he has a number of people, including his deputy prime minister, shadow prime minister, and deputy foreign minister, not just because of them, but because he won't put the money into sustaining it either. And there's a lack of decision, lack of ability to do 2.5% of GDP on defence means that they would have difficulty running nuclear deterrent as well in the years ahead. So I think for all of those reasons, it's incredible for them to suddenly claim they're in favour just because it happens to be near an election.
I want to talk to you a bit about Nigel Farage, because this is the other big story today. Nigel Farage announcing that he is going to take over as a leader of Reform UK, and he's also going to stand for them as a candidate in the Clacton constituency election. Are you worried about the impact that Reform UK is already having on the Conservative Party and could actually have even more with Nigel Farage as leader?
Well, look, the first thing I'd say is if you believe in sorting out some of the problems in this country, including and particularly something that Reform talk about a lot, which is the small boats, then surely preventing the guy who wants to scrap the Rwanda scheme, who doesn't believe in actually controlling that illegal immigration across the channel, and that is, of course, Keir Starmer. He voted against our plans 136 times. Doing anything which essentially gets him in, or gets him in and gets him a bigger majority, surely is bad for the very thing that you started believing in. So a vote for Reform, very simply, is a vote for Starmer. And I don't believe that's sensible. I don't think it's what the country really wants. I think in reality, it would mean that people's goals of stopping illegal migration, for example, but also many other areas, including in the defence of the realm that we were just talking about, would be significantly damaged. And that's why I would be fighting for that.
Can I squeeze in one last question while I've got you? I'm slightly fascinated by this because, you know, like Nigel Farage was at Conservative conference, of course. He's now saying that he's going to spend the next 5 years campaigning against the Conservative Party. I mean, why do you think he kind of hates you guys so much? What's going on?
Well, look, it's for other people to answer for themselves. I don't try and answer for other party leaders. We have a very clear plan for this country. We have a very bold set of initiatives. In fact, I think anyone looking at this election fairly would say we're the ones who are coming up, generating the new ideas. And we've talked about the security that we want to create in this country. All of that is at risk, with the only other possible outcome from this election. You're either going to have Rishi Sunak in number 10, or you're going to have Keir Starmer. It's a fantasy to imagine that we're going to end up with any other outcome other than Keir Starmer being handed more power to do things that you really don't want him to do with this country. So I think it's very, very important to be incredibly clear about the impact of thinking that a vote for reform is anything other than a vote for Keir Starmer.
Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme tonight.
You're welcome.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub, Labour on the defensive, how Keir Starmer pitched his team as the party of national security. I'll speak to the Shadow Cabinet Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Hello, welcome back. The Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us on the programme tonight. Well, if that MRP is anything to go by, you may as well give up campaigning now in case you drop the Ming Vase.
Well, Sophie, not a single vote has been cast in this general election. It hasn't been cast by post, and obviously no votes will be cast on the day until 4th of July. Now, Of course, we are confident, but we are most certainly not complacent. You know, I've been out all day today. My colleagues are out in their own constituencies and around the country, and we will continue to fight hard for every single vote until the close of poll at 10 o'clock on the 4th of July. We will never take the voters for granted.
Talking about not taking voters for granted or constituencies for granted, the MRP does also project that your Shadow Culture Secretary, Thangam Debonair, might lose her Bristol West seat to the Green Party. If the Green Party do start eating into some of those areas that have voted Labour before, do you think it was a mistake to drop your pledge to spend £28 billion on green projects?
Well, I was actually it's the Bristol Central seat, actually, that I've actually been down to campaign in recent days. I was there on Saturday morning campaigning with Thangam, actually putting a very strong Labour message. And I think in that message is a real commitment to deliver on this from GB Energy, publicly owned energy company with an initial capital investment of over £8 billion. There'll also be our Warm Homes Plan, but also our National Wealth Fund. Now, these are very substantial policies. And when we come to the choice at this election, there will be one of two governments after that election. It is either going to be 5 more years of chaos under the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak, or a changed Labour Party under Keir Starmer that really can move then to deliver on this agenda going forward, and of course meet our target of clean energy by 2030. That was the message Thangam was putting very effectively to the voters of Bristol Central on Saturday.
Well, let's talk a bit about what a government would look like if you do end up winning the election. Let's talk about defence. Keir Starmer committing to a nuclear triple lock today, protecting Trident. Now, among the commitments is to build 4 new submarines in Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria. But I'm just trying to get my head around it because that's already happening, isn't it? So this isn't, I mean, what's actually new in this announcement?
Well, we are committing to the completion of this programme of the Vanguard class. That's the new class of submarines. They are projected to be all 4 completed by the early 2030s. So to get to the completion of all 4, which is what you need to have a continuous at-sea deterrent, which we believe in, you have to be committed.
You're just not going to stop it.
We are, well, it's a bit more than just not stopping it, Sophie, because you have to be committed, first of all, to the deterrent, the continuous at-sea deterrent in principle. Second, you have to be committed to building all 4 of them in Barrow, but you've also got to be committed to any change in the programme, any additional needs that you might have as the programme goes on. We are absolutely committed to that, and we're committed to it because it is central to our security going forward. You think about the threats we face around the world, the security challenge of China, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the instability in the Middle East that's led to our own ships being fired on in the Red Sea. It is absolutely essential. I think setting out that commitment was important because it shows the first duty of any government is to keep the country safe. And if we're privileged enough to form a government, that will be the first priority of the Labour government.
OK, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme tonight. Thomas-Symonds there. Well, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer will be going head-to-head in their first TV debates of the campaign tomorrow night. They'll be facing off on ITV. And the hosts of Sky's Electoral Dysfunction podcast have some close experience with TV debates. You can scan the QR code to listen. The former Labour advisor, Aisha Hazarika, has been speaking to Beth Rippey and Ruth Davidson about how leaders prepare for debates and how, in Rishi Sunak's case, he's going to be trying to turn the tide in the polls, and Keir Starmer trying to hold on to his lead. Well, these guys have had a bit of experience with TV debates as well, haven't we? Theo, we were just chatting, weren't we? You played, I think, Nick Clegg, was it?
Yeah, I helped prepare Gordon for the 2010 TV debates, and Alistair Campbell played David Cameron. Gordon obviously played himself, and I got to play Nick Clegg. So, I had that perfect job that you would want of being able to be as mean as you want to Alistair Campbell and Gordon Brown without any comeback.
So fun, yeah,
it was a pretty. I think the TV debates are pretty tough. I think the thing that people underestimate is just how much pressure they put on a leader. But I'm sure, when we did it in 2010, we had 3 90-minute debates, and there was only one question that we didn't anticipate. So I think we should
What was the
expect...
question that you didn't anticipate?
The question was actually in the Sky debate, and it was a question about the Pope. And Gordon, being Gordon, answered that actually very comfortably. But we had predicted and prepared and rehearsed to death everything. So hopefully tomorrow will be a moment where there is some spontaneity. But I think these guys go into it extremely well drilled.
Chris, how about you? Much debate experience yourself?
Yes, a bit over the years. I've actually worked on, I forget how many election campaigns, but the TV debates are sort of actually relatively sort of new. They don't go back that far, do they? So, yes, some experience of taking part in prep, watching prep as well. And as Theo says, I mean, the thing about them, we call them debates, but really they are opportunities for the leaders to go out and say the things that they would have always planned to say, and they've spent days rehearsing. It would be nice to see a bit of actually back and forth between the leaders. And I wonder actually if these two, actually there's a bit of instinct to do that. You know, Keir Starmer is a lawyer, I know Rishi Sunak is somebody who likes to cut into festive politics. So maybe we'll see a bit more back and forth and a bit less, fewer prepared lines.
And there's a sense that Sunak's got nothing to lose, so he's got to go for it. Right?
He's got to go for it and try and trip him up, yes.
Can TV debates change an election campaign, do you think?
We saw it with Clegg to some degree. He had that sort of take-off in the middle of the campaign. I think they give people a chance to really make a judgment on you as a leader, not just in what you say, but how you appear and sort of how you're listening to the other candidates as well. Because that was one of the big things we learned is you spend more time on camera listening. And so people are looking for those clues as to what makes this person tick, what kind of leader would they be. And I think it does make a small, marginal difference, but that's what elections are about.
What do you think?
I think there are those moments, aren't there? Different things. I actually remember the Conservative leadership debate, and Rory Stewart was sort of doing quite well, and then it sort of went slightly wrong. He ended up taking his tie off, and things like that stick in the mind, etc.
It's true. It's something like that, isn't it? That you
things
remember.
Like that, and as you say, it's how you listen, how you interact with the other person. But do they change things fundamentally? I'm not sure they do. In this election, it just feels, doesn't it, like people have decided. And actually, this feels to me like the first election campaign I worked on, which was back in 2000, when William Hague was leader. We spent weeks campaigning, we spent a lot of money, and at the end of it, we made a net gain of 1 seat. And I just wonder if that's what we're looking at.
Okay. Thanks both. Really good to have you on Politics Hub this evening. Well, that is it from us this evening. A busy programme. I'll be seeing you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. She's in Cardiff for a special programme, so do stay with us as the election countdown continues. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m.